I don't know whether it was in high school or college that 1984 was required reading. I know that I read it then. And I know that this book is principally thought of as, I guess, a kind of political parable. I recently picked it up again because I wanted to see whether, in addition to all of that, it was actually a good story. Now, of course, a lot of the terminology from this book shows up really frequently in political opinion pieces. I mean, things like newspeak, thought crimes, Big Brother, and so on. I'm sure that Orwell's main concern was to warn about how bad communism was. And he pretty effectively explores things like media control and government surveillance, and how a dictator can manipulate and control history, thoughts, lives in such a way that nobody can escape it. Now, if you want a thoughtful analysis of the political implications of this book, then you're probably best off going on YouTube and plugging in Christopher Hitchens along with George Orwell. I'm only concerned with whether it's a good story. Is it, in fact, a good novel? To jump to my bottom line, I think that for the most part it is. The plot's reasonably straightforward. Winston Smith is the main character, and he's a minor party bureaucrat inside the government. His job is to rewrite history for the Ministry of Truth, and he lives and works in London. A whole lot of the first part of the book is concerned with describing the ins and outs of daily life in this miserable society. And that's where most of the terminology that you've become familiar with appears. You know, you learn a lot of things about the Ministry of Truth, doublethink, and of course, Big Brother. All of this is very well done, and it paints an extremely, real bleak picture of what life is like in this communist society. Now back to the plot. Winston Smith meets and falls in love or lust with a woman named Julia. They snag a little hideaway for their affair from an old man antique dealer. Then they get befriended at work by a guy named O'Brien. He's a member of the Inner Party who appears to be a member of the resistance. He furnishes them with an underground book that explains the origins of the current world order. O'Brien and the old antique dealer actually are members of the thought police. Winston and his girlfriend Julia are arrested and tortured, and after a particularly brutal torture session, Winston betrays Julia. As you might expect, this throws a kind of a wet blanket on their affair. Now, I'd say George Orwell kept me pretty locked in while I was reading this book. And that's all except for the middle part where he quotes extensively from the underground book that they got from O'Brien. It was somewhat interesting, but to me it seemed a little too pat and a little half-baked. But I quickly got past that and I enjoyed the rest of the story. Now, frankly, it's impossible to do what I tried to do and read this book just as a story. You really can't resist making comparisons between the current state of play in the US and the world that Winston Smith lives in. I didn't see any prescriptions for how to prevent the world of Big Brother from happening. And you don't really get suggestions about what you do once you've got it. Everything looks hopeless. I suppose Orwell's idea was that if you understand what it could be like, then you'll figure out what it is you have to do to keep it from happening. Now, all that political stuff aside, and you're like me and you read it a long time ago, you might find it interesting to pick it up again, just as a story. If you never read it, I suggest you give it a try. 1984, George Orwell. I'll see you next week.